think with theology of the body as a whole is the deep communion we long for. We long to be known, to be loved, to be seen for who we are. We long for that. We long to then also give ourselves to others in love. Like that's the heart of it. I think many people think theology of the body is all about sex. And that's like a part of it. The fundamental piece is I long for a lasting love. I'm made for this. And that the human loves I experience, whether it's in friendship, in community, but especially the most intense one of marriage, is all a foreshadowing of the perfect love of God. In fact, marriage itself, the sacramental theology, is that it's a participation in Christ's very love for the church. So JP2 had a magnificent way of just speaking to the human heart that you long to be loved.
Welcome to Into the Truth, the podcast from the Catholic Truth Society. Very happy to be able to welcome all the way from the States, Dr. Edward Shree. Welcome. So you've done a lot of work on theology of the body. And you've written Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love. And today we're going to speak a bit about your latest book that you wrote together with your wife, The Good, the Messy, and the Beautiful, the Joys and Struggles of Real Married Life. And you live in Colorado, I read, together with your 8 children.
Yes.
So you're beating me by 1.
Yes, so it's a delight. We don't see big families in this modern world as often. Yeah. So blessings to you, and being a witness to the great blessings children are in this world. It's exhausting, it's tiring. I don't get as much sleep as other people do, I'm sure. It's financially expensive, and yet it's so worth it.
But tell me a little bit about your own background. Do you come from a large family? Was the faith?
No, I didn't come from a large family, but I came from a family where I had a very faithful mom. So I grew up in the Chicago area in the States, and my mom was an immigrant from Italy after World War II. My father came in the 1960s to Chicago from Thailand to study medicine. So I grew up half Italian and half Thai, and as I like to say, I had some of the best food in the world. It was really amazing.
So are you in like one of those Venn diagrams with one person, or do you know other Italian Thais?
I've heard of one
right.
other. I know seriously, I haven't met him, but I've heard of this other one that taught at one of the places I used to teach at. So
the food sounds amazing.
But my mom was very devout, and my father was very supportive of me being raised Catholic. Would come to our Catholic things and gave a lot of money to the church, even though he wasn't Catholic himself. And so that left a big impression on me. I think having a really good Catholic school experience where I was at, and that's not the story of many in the United States, but I was blessed to have a really good formation, I think, from my mom, from the school, from a youth group and things, and then my faith really took off in college when I had to really own it for myself. When I started getting questions from many of my Protestant friends, where is the confession in the Bible, and why do you guys have to do works to get to heaven? So all these like Protestant Bible apologetic questions came up. But it wasn't just that. It was also the questions from my secular friends and professors. I went to a big state-run university, very secular, and questions about why is the Catholic Church against abortion, against contraception, and premarital sex, and why don't you just get with the times? And I had to think through those answers to those questions. And thankfully, I was just a young, 19, 20, 21-year-old. I didn't know how to answer the questions, but I had good friends and some good priests that pointed me to some good resources. One of those resources that really formed me early on that's why I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you at Catholic Truth Society, was from Frank Sheed. And he had a profound impact on my understanding and vision of life and the world, reality. I think that book, Truth and Sanity, Theology for Beginners, was very formative for me. So I'm just so thankful for the great work Catholic Truth Society has been doing for a long time.
So I'm presuming that was kind of late 90s or something like that.
Yeah, this is early 90s. Early 90s. Yeah.
So I mean, and your work has been with universities kind of throughout the period, presumably since then. So how have you found things kind of changing from that period in the 90s to today? I mean, we see on the news a lot of kind of news from American universities, and they always seem to be kind of in the forefront of some of the kind of crazy ideas around at the moment. Would you say that the experience that you had of people kind of challenging you for your faith, was that done in a kind of in a spirit of genuine inquiry or hostility, and how have things kind of changed since then that you've seen with the focused missionaries that you look after?
Yeah, well, I'll speak first of all just to my personal experience, and that is in the 90s, and at least in the United States, there was when you found committed, vibrant Catholics that fully embraced their Catholic faith, they tended to be, a lot of them were very influenced by the biblical apologetic movement in the United States. Things like Catholic Answers, Dr. Scott Hahn, EWTN, many others. And so there was a lot of resources in the 90s about how to answer Protestant questions about the Bible. And that was really good. I just barely ever get those questions anymore. In fact, I would say many of my evangelical Protestant friends, we have much more in common than together as Catholics and evangelical Protestants than I do with people in the secular age. And we see that there's a great battle that is taking place, and these are things that Newman himself foresaw, and we're in some really challenging times right now, where we've turned away for many decades, have turned away from our Christian roots, and now we're starting to see what that is going to mean in the culture. The attacks on not just human life, on marriage, on family, but even just some of the basics, some of the most basic human values. So bring that full circle. The work I do with Focus, and we work with young college students all over the United States, and we're on 9 campuses around Europe as well.
Including Northern Ireland. I think nothing in Britain at the moment.
Not in Britain in the moment. We hope to come back.
Yeah.
Pray for that. We want to be able to serve here as well. But we're in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and also in Germany and Austria. But whether it's here in Europe or in the States, it's the same kind of story, that young people are deeply wounded by the secular culture. It's a beautiful line from Pope Francis about the secular relativism that we have. He says, relativism wounds people. And I think, I've written a book about how do you address the problems of truth. People don't believe in truth anymore. This is the Catholic Truth Society, right? But we don't even believe in truth. You can have your truth, I can have my truth, but there's no truth that's true for everyone anymore. But when you live in a culture like that, it's not just a bad idea, but it ruins people's lives. And I love that Pope Francis says that. Relativism is wounding people. So if young people are growing up in an era where everyone just does whatever they want, you're just told you can choose whatever direction you want, do whatever you want with your sexuality, whatever gender you want, and then they see their parents making decisions. Well, I was with your mom for a while, but I found this other woman. That deeply wounds a child. and there's a serious real hurt in their lives. And so whether it's divorce and broken homes, or whether it's all that they're taking in on social media, whether it's the hookup culture that's very prevalent today, just my experience and what we hear from our Focus missionaries working with college students, that so many young people who've given in to pornography, given into sexual addiction, or even maybe not addiction, but they're just sleeping around with one person after another, cohabitating, and then it breaks up and they're deeply hurt. We come across people all the time, young people that are deeply just lonely, full of anxiety, full of just uncertainty, lacking hope, on the brink of despair in life. And I think, we pride ourselves in our secular age as being very, technologically advanced, and, we have science and we know better than any age ever before. That was the spirit of the Enlightenment, and we're full blown today. And yet we're the most anxious, the most lonely, the most depressed people in human history. Why is that? It's because we've turned away from God. We've turned away from the basic virtues of human life. We don't even know what friendship is anymore. And we need to give the art of living back to the next generation.
I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned Catholic Answers, and I remember listening to some of their, the first time that you could kind of get it through your phone. I was kind of listening to them driving into the office here in central London, and found it absolutely fascinating, that kind of classical apologetics that they were doing, especially with Protestants, etc. But I already found in my life, I have a feeling that in terms of secularization, Britain's always kind of way ahead in that sense. And I already found that those questions just weren't I'd never kind of come up against them, partly because I suppose people are much more private about their own beliefs, but also, meeting up with people who held those views was just kind of getting rarer and rarer. And as you say, at that point, you were speaking to people, although that was one of the main focuses of apologetics. You were essentially speaking to people who understood what we were talking about, in terms of kind of natural law, in terms of what man is for, in terms of our relationship to God, and we were kind of talking about some sort of details at the edges. I mean, I'm simplifying here, but I think we can say that both here and in the States, in the period following that, I think we've got to the point where, in fact, we're losing the shared kind of values, or maybe even the shared kind of outlook on life that we were kind of depending on to do that kind of apologetics. So, I mean, one of the questions in particular to do with kind of marriage and sexuality, presumably, I mean, you will have seen attitudes changing very drastically in that kind of short period, should we say, in that generation from the kind of 90s in particular to now. So I suppose the question I would ask is, what have you seen that's really caused this change? And what would you say is the kind of initial answer, at least from an apologetics perspective, to be able to start speaking about the church's truth? Yeah. I don't know, the truth about marriage and sexuality in particular.
Yeah, I think it's not as much a change as much as it is just simply the outworking of what's already been there in seed form for over a century, and that is just the secularization of the culture around us, and that affects Catholics. If you're a Catholic living and breathing in the Western world, if you have an iPhone, if you're on YouTube, you can have the Android too. You're watching Netflix and Hollywood shows. You're just taking in constant doses. St. John Paul II has a wonderful line in Redemptoris Missio. I think it's Article 33. He says that there are whole sectors of the baptized who've adopted a secular model of thinking and living. And he saw this. This is, very early on. This is, late 70s, early 80s. He's seeing, this need for what he called a new evangelization, because there are many Catholics that are baptized. Many of them might even go to church. They might even volunteer at their parish, So they were involved, but they were just taking in so much of the secular mindset and the values of the secular world that if you looked at them apart from a few hours on a Sunday morning, you would say that this you couldn't tell that this person was Catholic. And I think that's the root form. So that's already happening. It was happening in Sheed's time. It's happening already in Newman's time, quite frankly. And he's addressing that. He's putting his finger on that. Even on the plane out here, I was reading some of the things that he's going after in his own lifetime of people just making very secular assumptions and not seeing the world with a heavenly perspective, that we're made for an eternal destiny. We're just seeing things in a very this worldly way. I actually just I recorded a podcast recently on this. It wasn't about the topic of the definition of marriage or abortion or transgender issues, but it was like, what are the roots behind that? How do we get there? And to be able to see the unraveling from the Reformation to the Enlightenment to postmodernity today, there's so many roots questions behind these questions. Like, is there truth? And when I say there's no truth, what does that really mean? And what is life really all about if there is no truth? And I think that leads in two very different directions. I think we need to go back to that question. Is there truth? Is there a God that loves us and made us with a marvelous plan or not? And if there is, you just go two different directions. And also, do I really believe in original sin? Because the Enlightenment and most secular people today think they're immaculately conceived like the Blessed Virgin Mary.
But I mean, I think in one sense we're not to risk getting too philosophical. I think in what you can understand why, I don't know, the promoters of transgender ideology or of homosexuality, really attack the church and attack the church's teaching on sexuality. In a sense, you can understand why they would really kind of go for it. But I think what is more difficult to understand is how we've got to a point in many Western societies where, in a sense, the very idea of getting married or having children just seems, why bother? I think we got to. I read recently that a survey done among Gen Z, or more correctly Gen Z, that over half would now. Well, I think it was just under half actually, just under half. Basically, aren't planning to have any children in order to have time for themselves. So, I mean, it's not necessarily an ideological stance. It's just kind of like sort of
why bother?
Yeah, well, so much other stuff to do. Why bother doing this thing? So, I mean, it seems to me that your latest books on marriage, almost now we have to do a kind of apologetics in favor of the thing that every generation before us considered to be the most important thing that they could do. How have we got there, and what can we say to people about that? I mean, you were talking to me before the podcast about what a great thing marriage is, what a wonderful gift it is with all its difficulties. But why have we lost sight of that?
Yeah, well, many things
happened
there.
Small question.
Yeah, it's full. But first of all, why don't we want to have children anymore? Many people haven't grown up with a lot of siblings. They haven't seen like the joy and blessings that come from as you've experienced in bigger family life. And but also I think we're not living. If life is just about, like, I don't have a spiritual vision of the world in my life, I just see myself as just making more money and having more resources to buy things, a consumer, or sexual pleasure, or just having fun and watching just EPL games all the time, or clicking on Instagram and TikTok over and over and over again, thinking that's going to somehow make me happy. Like, if that's where I'm at, then why would I want children? That's just going to get in the way of me pursuing my own comfort and pleasure. So again, I think it's hard to just do an apologetic just on why you want to have children and then give that to some 18-year-old girl in Italy. A friend of mine teaches English in Rome to Italian teenagers, and they all just dread having a child. They just don't have children. So that's all over Europe.
Kind of not interested at all. There's
why would you want
other things to do before that.
I don't think you're gonna just come up with a track that gets a young teenage girl to say, "Oh no, I want to become a mom." Yeah, that'd be a great idea. It's a deeper thing, and so maybe can I share a fun story? I'm gonna share a fun story. So when I first started teaching it was my first teaching post after my doctorate in Rome. I was teaching at a small school in Kansas that today is known as this great Catholic college in the United States. It's called Benedictine College. Back then, it was not known, and it wasn't really that Catholic. Most of the people in my class were forced to take this religious studies requirements. They took me for this one class called Moral Theology. It was my first time teaching moral theology, and I thought, oh, wow, I got to teach all these 19, 20, 21-year-olds about the church's teaching on morality. And they don't want to be there. They're forced to take this class. They're all relativists. They're getting drunk on the weekends. They're sleeping with their girlfriends. And I have to talk to them about morality. This is going to be hard. But what I did was I went back, and as I was preparing that summer for the class, I really wanted to present the church's vision in a truly Catholic way, the way Aquinas would, or many of the great church fathers. And it's not about like these rules. You can't, have an abortion. You can't use contraception. So I didn't even touch those topics until the last 2 weeks of class. I started the whole class just asking questions about what we're made for and happiness, what makes you happy, and what doesn't make you happy. And we just spent a lot of time on that question. I think that's a really important question to go after. And what we read texts from Aquinas and Aristotle and others on that, and that we saw that, well, we're made for friendship with others. We're going to find, we're unique as human beings. We have an intellect to know and a will to choose to love, and so I'm made to know and love other people. That's Aristotle saw that, but Aquinas sees the greatest friendship is God, right? That's what charity is. And so people would start buying in on this, going, okay, yeah, I want relationships. And then we spent the heart of the class was actually looking at, well, we need virtue to be able to live those relationships well. You can't just say, I love you and I have feelings for you, because you've all had relationships where people let you down, whether it was a parent, a brother, a coach, a teammate, a friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. And just simply having the feeling of love doesn't mean it's going to last. How do you build a lasting love? And you need virtue, because if you don't have, you're growing in virtues like generosity, patience, courage, you will end up doing impatient, selfish, and cowardly things that hurt other people. And so they started making these connections. And they're seeing the beauty of, oh, I want to grow in virtue. And this is why I've been hurt in relationships. This is why my parents let me down, or my friend in high school let me down. It was because they lacked in virtue. And I'm not even talking about God a lot in this class so far. This is 2 months into the class. We're just looking at the virtues, and they're starting to make connections. And then I said, okay, then we come to the modern world where we've gotten rid of this tradition of the art of living and the virtues, and now we just tell everyone, do whatever you want. What happens when people just do whatever you want? What happens when your boyfriend just does whatever he wants with you? What happens when your parents just don't make you the priority but make their careers a priority? What happens when dad wants to leave mom for someone else? And we can't say that that's wrong because there's no truth, right? That's what the modern world says. And they start connecting all the dots for their own hurts in their lives is because of the relativistic secular culture we're living in. Now they're much more open to, okay, is there a better way? But you see, this is hard to do in a soundbite. This is hard to do on Intelligence Squared. You can't go. I had a whole semester, and they were forced to listen to me, every day. But
the church doesn't deal in slogans in the way that the world does, and often many of the most toxic ideas are brilliantly kind of summarized in like a phrase. And for us, it's much more difficult because we're talking about the complications of being a human being, of having relationships and all the rest of it.
But I think that gave a foundation. Then the last couple of weeks of the class, we started hitting all the hot button issues, premarital sex. And they're starting to see, so that actually, because that's more based on just this person getting pleasure from me, they're not really committed to me. They're just committed to what they're getting out of me. Oh, but he says he loves me. But deep down, I know if he really wanted a committed, lasting love, he would marry me. But he's not doing that. He's basically saying, I give myself to you, and I'm totally there for you until someone better comes along. That's basically what premarital sex in the end is all about. But you can't just come right out and say that. I think when you prepare someone's heart. Now again, I want to be clear. If someone asks you that and you have to answer the question, yes, you say the truth. But if you really want to win someone's heart, it's a long-term conversation. I had them for a semester-long class. All the listeners out there, you have friends and loved ones. Don't think that you have to answer the question in one meeting. Think of it as a long-term game. Think of it as multiple conversations about friendship, about virtue, about happiness, about what is love. If we get those things right, then they're going to be able to see more readily the problems with premarital sex or contraception or all those, again, controversial hot-button moral issues.
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken a lot about marriage in particular. I'd be interested just to know, because one of the difficulties, I think, especially when people start thinking about it from a Catholic perspective, is that you end up having a lot of kind of ideas about what a marriage should look like. You end up reading a load of books, listening to a load of podcasts, and then you suddenly realize that maybe your relationship might not be quite as exactly as it should be in the books, etc. So, I mean, how did you navigate? I mean, presumably you didn't have a perfect relationship either. And I didn't with my wife. How did you kind of navigate that and get to the point where you can actually start sort of giving some useful advice, as you have done in many podcasts and books as well?
Well, this is why my wife and I wanted to write that book. The good, the messy, and the beautiful, the joys and struggles of real married life. Because there's a lot of things on the theology of marriage, and I've written some of those things, so I love that. And there's a lot of stuff on like little practical things like, okay, how do you have a good fight with your spouse? And how do you, communicate better? And, okay, and those are helpful, but we wanted to get more to the heart of marriage, the spirituality of marriage, which is informed by the theology. So, but to bring it to the complicated messiness of daily married life. Because my experience is that we see this even with many of our focused missionaries. These are people that are going to daily mass. They pray a holy hour every day. They pray the rosary. They're doing evangelization on college campuses. And then they get married, and they're a couple years in their marriage or a couple of kids in their marriage, and like, wow, I had no idea how hard this is. I had no idea how much we would hurt each other. Like, no one can love you like your spouse, and no one can hurt you like your spouse. and even though many people go into marriage thinking, oh, I love Jesus and this is going to be great, it's really hard, and yet that's actually part of how the sacrament is working in our souls. So my wife and I would just say, oh, hey, join the club. It's okay. Everyone goes through this. But in this intense relationship called marriage, where there's nowhere to hide, you're completely exposed. Like you can kind of manage the perceptions of people at work or people at your parish, and but like when you're with this person day in and day out, they see you with all your glory and all of your faults and all of your weaknesses, and it's like the intense relationship stuff comes out, your selfishness, your pride, a lot of stuff from your past comes out, wounds from your past. All of that is coming out, but it's coming out because God loves you and wants to heal you. He wants to fully sanctify you. And he's going to do this either in purgatory, or he could start right now. And when those things bubble up in marriage, not to panic, but to realize God is wanting to put his finger on something to change something in you, to bring his love deeper into your soul so that you learn to love more like Jesus loves.
Yeah. I mean, for me, one of the most important moments was to bring that theology of the church's teaching about marriage and the insights, especially of John Paul II. I want to give a real name check to St. John Paul II for everything that he did for married people. I think it is still underestimated in the church. But I remember trying to read Love and Responsibility while I was getting ready to get married, and just not being able to kind of connect with it at all. Finding it very hard going, and didn't really know what he was talking about. And then 2 or 3 years into my marriage, we went on holiday to Sicily, where my wife's from. So it was in the summer. You expect to be going there, beach every day, all the rest of it. Anyway, it rained for a week. It's never happened since. And so. And in Sicily, when it rains, nobody goes out. There's nothing to do, basically. So we were just in the house, and there was this dog-eared copy of Love and Responsibility. I picked it up again. And all of a sudden, having had all those difficulties, all those experiences, even just in the first 2-3 years, where everything suddenly made sense. I remember reading it late into the night, waking my wife up constantly, saying, "Yeah, listen to this. This is exactly what happened with us." And suddenly, what I thought were just theories actually then kind of landed with our experiences and helped us hugely. So, I mean, from that point of view, I think that what the church has to say about this can be really helpful. But the church hasn't really spoken about it enough, I think. I remember, reading in George Weigel's book on John Paul II, he spoke about the theology of the body as this kind of bomb that was supposed to kind of go off. And in a sense, that was 20 years ago that he wrote that. And I think it's still hasn't gone off. I mean, what do you think?
Oh,
what do you think is kind of? I mean, it has in certain people. I mean, those who've got it really kind of get it. But I think it still hasn't made its way into the kind of the mainstream. Or would you disagree with that, or would you have some sort of theories as to why that is?
Well, first of all, it's new in the sense of, he's giving these addresses at the beginning of his pontificate, and, Catholic churches, it takes time for these things to enculturate. That's part of it. But the other thing is, I would say among the faithful people that I meet in the Western world, especially in the United States and Canada, I have more experience there, but I come across people here in the UK and in other parts of Western Europe that have been deeply impacted by it. I would just say, just like the majority of Catholics in the United States don't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. We're still waiting, we've lost that. That's really sad. They think it's just a symbol. But I would say those that really believe in the Eucharist, I would bet many of them, JP2's Theology of the Body has touched their life. And it was people that are fervent. They are in that, top tier of Catholics that would listen to a Catholic Truth Society podcast, and they go to Mass every week and the Holy Days of Obligation, and they pray, and they love Jesus. Like among those folks, I think they're being very well formed with Theology of the Body. Not all, and some of them need to learn it more, but a lot of them have been impacted by it, and maybe they don't even realize it, because I would say even and again in the States, there's a number of textbooks and resources that are informed by Theology of the Body. So somebody's getting a marriage prep, but they don't even know what theology of the body is, but they're hearing about these ideas. And I think that's the time bomb, if you will, is still, will there be an explosion, across the church? I hope that's the case, not just for theology of the body, but for the moral teachings of the church, the sacramental teaching of the church, the Christology of the church. There's a lot that isn't reaching the average person in the pew. But among the faithful ones, especially this younger generation, I can tell you almost every young person, in their 30s or younger, whether they're married or they're single, this has shaped them. It's helped them. I can tell you the book that I wrote on love and responsibility, this one here, The Men, Women, the Mystery of Love. I just meet people all over the world that have told me, and it's not my ideas. It's just simply taking JP2's wisdom, but they say this changed me. This saved me from a bad relationship. This helped my husband and I to discern we were going to move ahead, and we got married because of this. Like, in other words, it's deeply affecting them. I think that's good news, because I think what JP2 offered is not just brilliant insight that he just came up with on our own. He was a magnificent reader of human nature, the human heart, and he's connecting the great tradition of moral theology and sacramental theology of marriage with the human heart and the human experience in a beautiful way that resonates. This book has been used, like, for example, on the streets of New York City. In New York City, they had these love and responsibility groups that were meeting for over a decade. And they would have like young adults, maybe 60 to 100, gathered outside in this courtyard of a church, but it was a busy street. And people are passing by, and they notice all these young people, and what are they doing? And they'd have little pamphlets, and they took like little excerpts of the book and put them on little printed sheets. And people would walk by, and they would read it. And I heard from the leaders of this group over the years, they had many people, atheists, convert to Catholicism because of this. They had Catholics who'd been away for a long time come back. They had people who were in, cohabitating, stop cohabitating. I mean, this is just random people on the streets. And it's because, it's not, again, I want to be clear, this is not Edward Street's writing. It's the wisdom JP2 has is resonating with their hearts. And
so for someone who still hasn't kind of encountered it, but what would you say is the fundamental kind of how can I put it? The fundamental insight that John Paul II brought to the subject, and that you would kind of invite people to explore.
Yeah, I think with theology of the body as a whole is the deep communion we long for. We long to be known, to be loved, to be seen for who we are. We long for that. We long to then also give ourselves to others in love. Like that's the heart of it. I think many people think theology of the body is all about sex. And that's like a part of it. The fundamental piece is I long for a lasting love. I'm made for this. And the human loves I experience, whether it's in friendship, in community, but especially the most intense one of marriage, is all a foreshadowing of the perfect love of God. In fact, marriage itself, the sacramental theology, is that it's a participation in Christ's very love for the church. So JP2 had a magnificent way of just speaking to the human heart that you long to be loved. You long for a lasting love, a committed love, someone that loves you. That's not even with all your weaknesses, all your fears, all your dark parts of your life. They're there for you. And like that longing for another human person to love me is pointing to a deeper longing which is ultimately God is that perfect person that loves me, right? But I think what that does is when you get to the fundamental questions of what is love, that love isn't just this feeling like I love coffee, so I can say I love coffee, and I love the taste of coffee, I love the smell of coffee, I love the sound of coffee percolating in the morning, I love holding a warm mug on a cold day. I love coffee. It does something for me. That's the modern's view of love. You do something for me. And so many young people today are growing up in this culture. That's what love is. You do something for me. So you give me romantic feelings. I get this rush of emotion when I'm with you. You give me the sense of not being alone, or you come up with an Ed Sheeran kind of view of love. I'm in love with your body. I'm in love with the shape of you. It's not really about you. I'm just in love with the shape of your body and the sexual pleasure it gives me. That's how degrading. I'm not picking on Ed Sheeran, but let's say that song is far.
He's done some bad stuff.
That song is far from perfect. Let's say that. But But I think what JP2 did was really help us to see that love is not about, and again, these aren't new points. Aquinas writes about this, that real love is about committing myself to to the other person. It's to will the good of the other. It's seeking what's best for the other person, and we long for someone in our life that is doing that. They're not just in it for the feelings I give them. Because if that's it, I lived in such state of insecurity all my life, wondering, well, what if I don't perform well? What if I don't act nice one day? Or what if they see me at a low point? Will they still be there for me? Because they're not really committed to me as who I am. Then they're just committed to what they get out of me, whether it's pleasure or comfort or not being lonely or whatever that is, romantic feelings. And I think that's what's fundamental. And when it comes to marriage, beautifully, I love this image. He says, in the original marriage of Adam and Eve, you get a picture of what every human husband and wife longs for, and that is to be received and to be able to give yourself as a gift. And what does he mean by that? He means that it's as if like Adam, he has a beautiful line in Theology about it. He says that Adam, when he looked at Eve, this is before the fall, no original sin, and he saw that she was this beautiful daughter of God, made in the image and likeness of God. She is very good. That's what God says, right? And he says that Adam sees Eve with the vision of the Creator. He sees Eve not just as, oh, here's a helpmate to help me get things done. She was that, but she's more than that. She's not just beautiful, gorgeous woman. She was that, I'm sure, but he sees more than that. Not just someone that is there to make me feel good about myself. You do something for me. No, he saw with delight the way God did. And so it says Adam had a profound sense of responsibility for Eve. Eve, who's giving herself totally to him in love. And the way I expound on this, I say it's as if Adam, in every interaction with his wife, Adam had like a sense that he wanted to be so careful with every word, to honor, to serve, with every action. It's as if he was holding Eve's heart in the palm of his hand and just so carefully wanting to care for her as an amazing gift. Now, every woman longs for that. And I think every man deep down longs, reciprocally, to have someone that they can really entrust and give themselves to. The problem is there was this thing called original sin. The fall comes in and we bring in all of that original sin into our marriages. And so we often put up walls in our marriage. I don't feel like I can entrust my heart completely to my beloved, even in marriage. And that's where the process of sanctification in marriage, the healing of our hearts through prayer and the sacraments, that's meant to break down those barriers. But JP2 is so poignantly, I think, when I've done this talk, I've given this talk to married couples all over. And almost every time there's a few couples that weep because they go, I long for that, but I don't have that in my marriage. And then I don't single them out, but I just say, hey, everybody, some of us, when we hear this, we might be really sad, but just know nobody has this. Nobody has this side of the Garden of Eden because of original sin. But what that sorrow is pointing to is a desire for something, that God put that desire for that kind of perfect unity. And he wants to give it to us, but it's going to take a long process of the healing of our own hearts in marriage.
Yeah, because I think one of the big problems that has happened basically since John Paul II wrote or gave those catechesis in the 80s is the advent of the internet and the kind of explosion of porn, basically, which has because what you were talking about there is John Paul II is getting like to the very root of what the human heart kind of wants, but that root, you're going to have to dig through all, you said original sin, plus all the other sins that we add on top of them, before we can get to that. And it's almost as though the number of things which can distract us or take us away from that fundamental point has kind of multiplied. And in particular, we've already kind of mentioned porn has caused this kind of barrier between men and women, between us and our true desires, between the desire that God has put in our hearts, and so what's been your kind of experience, living through that period in which this has become kind of endemic, and the problems that that's causing, and the solutions that we can find in there. I mean, it's a big problem for married couples as well. I mean, my wife runs an apostolate for Catholic mums, and there's how often you hear of women, discovering that their husband has had a problem, and it destroys marriages, kind of, long afterwards. So what would you say is the hope that we can find in there?
Yeah, well, first, you're right to highlight that this has been a significant change. I could say when we first started Focus in 1998, the internet was out, and but the pornography thing wasn't as rampant as it is today, and we didn't have the iPhone, whereas it's right there at everyone's fingertips. So the human formation challenges we had with working with young people back in 1998, 2000, 2002, are very different than today. And a lot of it has to do with more breakdown in marriage and family. It has to do a lot with the phone and social media and just what that does to form someone's soul. But a lot of it is around pornography as well. And so, and what pornography does is it gets us, people say, "Oh, I'm just looking," or "What's the big deal? It doesn't affect me." Well, it deeply affects you, right? It makes you very addicted. So that's clear. But the other thing is, John Paul II beautifully says pornography. Like you can look at some religious art has nudity in it. You can see the breast of a saint or something, or the Blessed Virgin Mary nursing the baby or something. People are like, "Oh, well, what's the big deal? How is this different? Pornography different from some art you might see in the Vatican Museum or something." And JB2 just directly goes after it, says, well, it's very different, because in this case, yes, the body is beautiful, and it is made in the image and likeness of God, and there's a certain way you can artistically depict that's not drawing attention to reducing the person. It's like it's elevating your mind to think of God and the beautiful creation. Whereas what pornography does is denigrates the person, lowers us to look at the person merely as an object for sexual pleasure. And so have there been people that have looked at the Sistine Chapel and had an impure thought? I doubt that many. Has there been many men that looked at pornography and haven't had an impure thought? I doubt that many. Very different kinds of things. So it enslaves us and reduces us, makes us blind to the beauty of the human person itself, and I reduce them to just a body to be exploited in my own imagination, my own thoughts, for my own sexual pleasure. And that's totally used. That goes against the heart of what we're looking at. The great point JP2 hammered over and over again is, what is love? Love is not about you make me feel good, coffee love. You do something for me. Love is about giving myself as a gift to someone else, seeking what's best for them. And pornography prevents me from being able to do that. So where's the hope in all of this? I can tell you, in the Work and Focus, one of the great things, we have something that was started just a few years ago called the Bosco Project, named after St. John Bosco. And it's working with men that have had, maybe some areas they need help in this space. They're good men. They love the Lord, and they really have had some real serious conversion. But these things, they just because you go to a conference and say, "I want to give my life to Jesus," doesn't mean you're not going to, all of a sudden, all of your past sins just go away. You still have a wounded human nature. But they're good men, and they want to serve, and they want to go on mission and do the work of evangelization. So a number of them, they live together in community, and they're getting regular formation and accountability. But they're also doing some basic light mission together and serving the poor and other people, getting out of themselves. And we're finding that, with this intentional community really dedicated to, we're really going to go after this, to have interior freedom, that the initial results in the first couple of years have been amazing, astounding, of how many of them have been able to really find freedom. And some of them have found freedom and have gone on to the seminary now. Some of them found freedom and they've gone on to do the work of evangelization on campuses. So it gives me hope that just because someone has this problem, it doesn't have to define them for the rest of their life. It may be a wound they carry all their life, maybe something they're going to have to always be on guard with, but God can break through the most intense addiction. God can really break through. I've seen that with so many of these men, and by the way, women. Many women are addicted as well, and I've seen them find freedom. That gives us great hope. should never despair. If we struggle or we have a loved one that struggles, God can really bring freedom. He's done that over and over again with many people.
Yeah. No, and I mean, especially when it comes to marriage, I think that difficulty can, in a sense, kind of slightly poison the well from which marriage draws. So I'd be interested to hear. I mean, I've loved listening to you and your wife speak about about the marital act, the sex within marriage as something kind of amazing sometimes not so amazing, but always something that kind of gives life. So let's talk about that, about what it gives to the marriage, and then we'll go on to talk about children as well after that.
So the sexual act itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. This is fun. This is spicy. In the book we wrote, we actually we have a whole chapter on the questions about what happens in the bedroom. Yeah. And we actually put it as an appendix, and we start off the appendix saying, chances are you picked up this book, scrolled through the table of contents, and saw this topic here at the end, and just skipped over everything and came right here to this chapter. I get it. Many people, a lot of young couples especially want some guidance on this, and many people don't talk about it. What my wife and I wanted to do is just say that the sexual act isn't the center of the married life. But it sometimes gives you a gauge on what's happening heart to heart in the relationship. And that's one of the things we underscore. And all that we do in that chapter is take wisdom from JP2 here. This isn't our ideas, but try to break it down in a modest way, but offer also some clear light on this. And so I think that's one key point I would highlight that we have in that part of the book is that the physical pleasure, the physical delight of sexual intimacy is meant to be an expression of the unity between husband and wife existing already heart to heart. So if husband and wife are connecting heart to heart, then probably what happens in the bedroom is going to go better. If husband and wife aren't connecting well, a wife especially feels like my husband doesn't really know my heart, isn't really listening, then the bedroom isn't, the physical act is maybe not going to be as good. And many married couples have gone through the motions of sexual, physical intimacy without the personal, emotional intimacy between the two. And so we write a lot about how important that is, that you're giving priority not to the sexual act, but priority to caring for each other's heart, knowing each other's heart, listening, serving throughout the day. There's that saying that, sex begins not in the bedroom, but in the kitchen. Are you caring for your wife in the kitchen? Are you talking? Are you connecting there? If you're not connecting there, it's not going to go well. So if you're wondering, why is my sexual life not going well? Ask yourself, how well are we doing in the rest of our married life? Now, there's things that come up, physical things. You might need to see a doctor and stuff like that. Okay, I'm not getting to that. But in general, okay, now when it comes to, I don't know how spicy we can get on the show. You can edit me out if I'll be modest.
We'll put a warning at the beginning. Or something.
But one of the great things JP2 talks about is how in sexual intimacy, men and women are, can you believe it, created differently? and that men achieve arousal very quickly, whereas a woman, it takes a longer time. And that can cause friction if we're not careful in that. So this is the beauty of seeing how men and women are very differently. And men want to sometimes just rush. I just want to get to climax and get there as quick as possible. But it's an act, JP2 says, it's an act of love, an act of virtue and patience on behalf of the husband, to respect his wife, to love his wife, and help her get to where she needs to be, so that in the ideal world you reach climax harmoniously together. That's what you want to aim for. You don't beat yourself up if she can't get there, but you do everything you can, because we're not wired that way. We just think, okay, I'll just spend a little time here. But he spells it out. He says this involves a lot of listening, observing how she responds, a lot of kisses, touches, and just a lot more than you may think. And so I think for young couples especially, that's really good for them to hear that. But it's an act of love. Otherwise, I'm just selfishly just trying to get to the pleasure that I want.
And also, the other thing I think that would be good for young couples to hear is that it takes time. It takes a long time to kind of reach, or it may take a long time to reach that kind of balance. As you said, I think I heard you say one point, the wedding night is unlikely to be the kind of the earth moving.
Yeah, that's what my wife
experience.
says. It's
Yeah.
not always going to be fireworks, and oftentimes the first time is good. Sometimes it is amazing for some couples. I've heard that from couples who told me that, but most couples is like, yeah, that wasn't what we were expecting.
Yeah.
And not to get discouraged on the wedding night, but not to get discouraged different seasons of life after a baby, different times. It's harder, and not every time has to be fireworks, as my wife likes to say. And you try your best. And
I think my mother used to say it's like your kind of meals through your marriage. Some of them are amazing, super tasty. Some of them have to be, functional. Some of them don't go so well at all. But in the end, overall, it helps and it nourishes you.
yes.
I think that's great to hear. And in terms of children, I'm quite interested in this. So I'm one of 8 myself. I have seven kids. We have loads and loads of nephews and nieces in the family, and this kind of joy of the large Catholic family, I think, is something that we've both experienced and that we're trying to recreate and we're trying to create. But there's a heck of a lot in the world today which is kind of militating against that view of the family. I mean, the big Catholic Italian family, it's a thing of the past. You go to Italy and was it 1.2 per couple.
Yeah, but you and I, with our Italian roots, we're trying to rekindle that.
Well, in a sense, we're living the kind of the Italian ideal of 75 years ago, kind of thing. So, what would be your kind of encouragement to couples who are finding it difficult, just practically? It's expensive. It's got a heck of a lot more expensive recently. Food bills going through the roof and all the rest of it. What would you say to those people who are just sort of saying, practically speaking, I might love to do this, but practically speaking, it's impossible?
Yeah, and I want to be clear. Every marriage is different. Every couple's situation. The church obviously allows for couples to use natural family planning in situations where whether it could be psychological, it could be physical health, it could be serious financial things, and so that's there. I think, again, I wish my wife were here. She's so eloquent on these topics. We actually just did a podcast in May on how to discern should we have another child. Actually, and what she often says is, she first of all always makes that disclaimer, because you can never look down on someone else and say, "Oh, how come they're not having children?" Everyone has their own situation, and they decide before God. But that being said, we should all be thinking, how do I get to a point where I at least want the child? I mean, maybe it's not the prudent thing right now. The church describes the gift of children in marriage as the supreme gift. Now, imagine if it was your wedding day, and at your wedding, people are leaving little envelopes or little gifts at the table. But there was this massive gift that's 20 times the size of every other present wrapped up that day, and it was called the supreme gift. Wouldn't you be really curious? Oh, wow, I want to open up that one. And that, I think that's the desire we should have. I think there's, while there are serious reasons to maybe say, okay, this is not the season, I think I'm going to just say myself, because I'm a weak man. I know myself, and I could be very tempted to just go, I'll come up with that reason right now because it's hard. I'll come up with that reason. But really deep down, I'm just wanting my own comfort. Like I want to get the latest phone, or I want to get the latest. I mean, if I have another child, I might not be able to keep my Netflix subscription. I know I've never really said those things, but I know myself. Those are the kinds of things I could be tempted by, or I might not be able to get this. And I think in our Western world, while yes, things are financially tight, there are greater challenges economically. I would just want to do a real examination of conscience before God and ask, okay, how many worldly comforts am I attached to? And I chose those instead of a child, because a child is going to last forever. The Netflix show is not. The latest technology is not. And it's not going to bring me as much joy and love. And it won't be a blessing to the children I already have. This is another point, is that one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids is not a tablet or it's other siblings. I mean, the joy when a baby is in the home. Like when we brought babies home, and like the love that's in the family is multiplying. We're getting ready to welcome our first grandchild. So really, it's really exciting. And my daughter lives close to our home, and so they're over all the time. And you just see my daughter's little sisters, my youngest children are just so excited for this new baby to come, and so new
the
life.
experience we've had this week in our family.
Yeah.
My little 5-year-old is now an auntie since Wednesday.
Oh,
and
wow,
it's
that's
just,
great.
I mean, the look on their face is priceless. I mean, really priceless.
Yeah. So can I look at my life and say, having 8 kids, I don't have as nice of a home as many other of my peers might have, or I don't have as nice of a car. I don't have
as many savings in the
bank and things. I mean, the Lord's provided in tremendous
yeah.
ways, and I'm thankful. But maybe I don't have as much time, and I certainly don't get as much sleep as many other people do. I know that. But I wouldn't trade a new car, a better vacation, more money in the bank for Madeline Paltry, called Luke, Josephine, Kira, and Eleanor. My kids bring so much joy, love to each other, to us, and to the world. It's so worth it. So my wife always says, if you have to go through a period where, okay, you're using natural family planning, because you discern this isn't the best time, your goal should always be to get back to what she calls baseline. You want to get back to, when can I have a child? What are the sacrifices I need to make to be able to get there? I think that's the disposition we want to have. How do we do it? And how that looks is going to be very different for every person.
Yeah, I think that's actually a brilliant way of putting it. The baseline, the kind of default setting, in a sense, is welcoming a new life. Then we could, other things can happen. Then, I mean, would you say that this expression, the contraceptive mentality, is that would you use that expression? Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah, I think it's. I've seen this. Again, I do a lot of work in marriage and family, and I've seen a lot of good-intended people in dioceses and parishes just say, "Here, we got to teach everyone natural family planning." And again, don't get me wrong. Like, in a world where everyone's just contracepting, the fact that you have some dioceses and parishes that are making that a priority, okay, great. But I think what I'd rather have them teach is the blessing of children.
Yeah.
And by the way, here's this resource if you need, in certain circumstances, that's secondary. And I think sometimes people make NFP like the primary central thing.
Right.
And again, it's a great gift to the church and, in the modern era. Okay. But the central thing is, do I see children as a great blessing? Am I open to life? And then when there's circumstances and I need this, great. But I think people might be tempted to just use this as a technological advanced, so that I can just live my kind of lifestyle and not be as open to the blessing of children. I think that's where it gets dangerous.
It says it flips kind of upside down the way that John Paul II spoke about it. Because I think I remember reading, he would speak about natural family planning as a way just of knowing yourself and knowing when to have children or when you can have children. Because that moment when you actually know that night when you come together, there is the real possibility that a child will arrive, puts like a whole different kind of spin on what's taking place. And you can only know that if you know what's going on. So I remember John Paul II sort of saying, no, it's not about not having children. It's about knowing exactly what's going on in order to be able to have children. And I think we speak about that too little.
Yeah, he talks about responsible parenthood as, and he mentions about, like, we have a responsibility to bring love, to bring life into this world, that it's good for the family and good for the world itself.
So, talking about natural family planning, I mean, it's one of those words which is spoken about in the church, but maybe is not always 100% understood. Could you give us a definition?
Oh, sure. I'll give a brief explanation. So basically, we in the modern world, we've been able to understand the woman's cycle better and when it is that she's ovulating. And so there's been many different there's different approaches to so-called natural family planning, which pays close attention to the cycle of the woman to know when is it that she is most likely to conceive a child. And so the church teaches that if you're discerning that right now you're going through a difficult time, there's a serious reason here to to not be open to life, that this is one way you can say, okay, well, I know that on these days or this week is but likely to have a child here, so maybe we just won't have sexual intimacy on those days. That's different than contraception. Contraception is where I want the sexual intimacy, I want the physical pleasure, but I use a condom or we use birth control, and so I'm going through an act that is meant to be ordered toward openness to life, an act that is expressing, I give myself to you completely, and I receive you completely, and yet in the very midst of this act that's meant to express total self-giving love, I put an act of a selfish wall and says, I accept everything about you except your fertility. I accept everything about you except the possibility of us becoming parents together. It was like there's a selfish act. I want the pleasure, and I'm going through the action, but not what the action is meant to symbolize and express.
So one of the questions I think that often is asked, especially in a world in which the culture around us is so often inimical to the faith, and will social media and the media will give messages that contradict the faith completely to our children. How would you say, what kind of advice would you give to people who having had children are really worried about passing on the faith to them?
Okay, I'll give a couple things. And what I'm going to draw from is from a great Catholic sociologist in the United States that teaches at Notre Dame. His name's Christian Smith. He's written a lot on this topic. I did a podcast on this this last year on this idea. But let me share with you some of the insights. First, what he did is he studied religious families, like committed Christian, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish families, even Mormon families and Muslim families, but a lot of them were Catholic and Protestants in this. And then he followed them for decades. And what was it about those that when they were in adulthood, they owned the faith? Like, what were the things from their childhood that made them continue to be faithful versus those that grew up in really committed religious homes, but then they turn away from the faith? And he found a few things. First, the parents had very high standards. The parents were very intentional, calling them to virtue, calling them to live the faith, forming them in morality, but that wasn't enough, because if that's all that they had, the kids tended to rebel. So if all the parents were just like, here, read this book, and you got to follow this doctrine, they needed to also have a close relationship with the parents. Like there was a spirit in the home of love. There was a sense that, like, okay, yeah, here's the high standard, but if you fall short of the standard, we still love you. You could make mistakes. Like that, I think that's a delicate balance there. You're holding a high standard, but you're also radiating the love of Christ. You know your child's heart, how important that is. And I see that when you go on, we only have one of those. If you're just like, oh, I'm there for my child, and they made a mistake, but I'm not actually calling them higher, and there aren't like consequences for their actions. That's okay. That's a problem. Because they'll never really, they tend to rebel from the faith. But if there's only the rules and the doctrines, they tend to rebel as well. So those are two key pillars that you have to hold in tension. I'll give an example. One of my kids kicked in America, we call them soccer balls. So we're a big football family. Okay, yeah. So we've been watching the Euro, and we're all rooting for England, by the way. And it's been a lot of fun. But one of my kids, just this last week, came to tell me he kicked the soccer ball and it broke our window. Okay, so I can do one of two things. Like, oh, hey, don't worry about it. That would be love without truth. Or I could just say, how dare you do that? And you got to pay for this, So, no, there's going to be, it's like, okay, these things happen, but you are going to have to pay for this. You're going to pay for half of this, So he's going to be a part of the process. There's a little bit of mercy in that. And he knew that, I think he was a little nervous. What's Dad going to say? But I, assured him of, okay, hey, be careful next time, but we'll work this out. But you're going to help pay for this, though. So trying to live in that tension. Then there's a third thing that we need, and that is being very intentional with the peers of this child as they're growing up, as they're entering their teen years. Who are they hanging out with? Who are they spending time with? Don't just say, I'm going to send them to this Catholic group or this Catholic youth group. Like, do you really know what's going on at that youth group? Do you know what's happening in that parish thing? Even just because it's Catholic, it's really important that the kids have some other Catholic peers that have the same kind of values that your family has. And you're intentionally, and that's hard to find in some places in the world, but you want to do everything you can to find so that your kids aren't isolated. So when you bring all those three things together, that seems sociologically have been shown to be more likely that the children will embrace their faith as adults.
Brilliant. So thank you so much, Edward. It's wonderful. It's been wonderful to speak about these sort of the really important things, and I think this what this podcast and indeed what the CTS and your work is all about. So thank you so much. Where can people best kind of encounter your work online or?
Oh, sure. Well, they can find my website is Edward Sri, just my name, edwardsri.com. I have my own podcast called All Things Catholic with Edward Sri. I always tell people, if you look up my last name, SRI, on whatever platform you use, be careful, because you might find an Indian Hindu guru, and that's not me. You got to type in Edward SRI, and you can find my podcast there. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you.